I'm freezing. Can I come in, please? I beg you, said the desperate Apache woman to the cowboy. The wind howled across the barren land, carrying with it a sharp, icy sting that bit at the skin and made the snow swirl in chaotic patterns. The world seemed to be a frozen wasteland, white as far as the eye could see, and eerily quiet except for the groan of the wind through the sparse trees and the distant echo of the mountains. In this lonely, cold world, a lone figure struggled forward, her small frame hunched against the cold, her thin clothes offering almost no protection. Every step was a battle, her boots sinking into the deep snow, her fingers turning numb despite the mittens she had wrapped around them. The woman was Apache, her dark hair tangled and damp from the snow that had fallen relentlessly all afternoon. Breath. Her eyes, dark and filled with fear, scanned the horizon with a desperate hope. She had been walking for hours, maybe even longer, through the wilderness after being forced to leave the place she had been staying. She had nowhere to go, no friends, no shelter, only the bitter cold and the endless stretch of white. Her body shivered uncontrollably, teeth chattering with each gust of wind that cut through the thin fabric of her coat. Urge. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to preserve any heat she had left, but it was slipping away, leaving her weak and trembling. As she stumbled over a hidden mound of snow, she cried out softly, more to herself than anyone else. I can't go on much longer. The words were lost in the wind almost immediately. Her mind raced, thinking of the dangers that surrounded her, the cold, the wildlife, and the possibility of getting lost forever. She thought of the warmth of a fire, of a safe place to rest, and of someone kind who might offer her a small reprieve from the harsh world outside. Brace. Her steps faltered, her energy waning, until finally, in the distance, she saw a faint glow through the trees. It was small, barely visible, but it was enough to give her a spark of hope. The glow came from a cabin, its chimney puffing out smoke that rose and vanished into the sky. Her heart leapt. There was someone there, someone human. She began to move faster, dragging her tired feet through the snow. She stumbled again, falling to her knees, but the thought of warmth, of safety, pushed her forward. Brand.
She cried out again, louder this time, her voice hoarse and trembling. Please.
Anyone. I need help. As she approached the cabin, she saw the outline of a figure inside. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in rough, practical clothes. He moved around inside with the calm confidence of someone used to living off the land, someone who understood the hardships of the wilderness. The woman's heart pounded. But she had no idea who he was, whether he would help or turn her away, but she had no choice. The snow had drained her strength, leaving her weak and desperate. With trembling hands, she knocked on the door, the sound echoing against the silence of the snowy night. The man paused. He heard the knock and the faint voice that followed. Almost lost in the wind, he approached the door, his face wary and cautious. He opened it a crack, peering outside, his eyes narrowing as he tried to make sense of the figure before him. The woman looked up, her face pale and wet with snow, her eyes wide with desperation. I'm freezing, she whispered, her voice breaking. Can I? Please, come in. The man hesitated. He had lived alone for years, trusting no one who wandered onto his land. Strangers were dangerous. He knew that, but there was something in her eyes, a mix of fear and vulnerability, that made it impossible to turn her away. The cold that had driven her to his door was clear in the way she shivered, in the way her lips were blue, in the way her entire body seemed to tremble. Despite his instincts telling him to stay cautious, he felt a pull in his chest, a desire to help someone who clearly needed it.
He opened the door fully, and she stumbled inside. The warmth of the cabin hit her like a wave.
She fell to her knees near the hearth, her body shaking as the fire's heat began to touch her frozen skin. Her hands were clasped together as if she were praying, and her face buried in her coat. The man watched quietly, giving her a moment to recover, his eyes softening as he realized the depth of her need. He didn't speak at first, simply moving around the cabin to light more lamps, to make the space feel safe and alive. The cabin was small but comfortable. Wooden beams lined the ceiling, and shelves held tools, supplies, and books that spoke of a life spent both working hard and thinking deeply. A small kitchen smelled faintly of dried herbs and coffee. The fire crackled, sending warmth across the room, and the man gestured for her to sit near it. "Protest." She obeyed, moving slowly, each movement painful as her stiff muscles protested.
Her eyes never left him, wary but trusting enough to stay.
He handed her a thick blanket which she wrapped around herself as if it were a lifeline. She sank into the warmth, closing her eyes and allowing herself for the first time that day to feel safe. "Bert." She whispered a quiet thank you, and the man nodded, his face still serious but softened by concern. There was a long silence between them, broken only by the crackling fire and the faint sound of the wind outside. The woman's body was beginning to thaw, but her spirit remained tense, still alert to danger. Slowly she began to speak, her voice low and hesitant. She told him about her journey, about being alone in the wilderness, about the fear that had driven her to his door. Her story was simple but powerful, each word carrying the weight of exhaustion, cold, and desperation. The man listened carefully, nodding occasionally, his eyes never leaving her face. He could see the truth in her words, the authenticity of her struggle, and it made the decision to help her feel entirely right. Outside, the wind continued to blow, but inside the cabin a fragile sense of peace had begun to form. The woman's hands, once blue and stiff, were warming, and her breathing was slowing to a calmer rhythm. She looked at the man with cautious gratitude, realizing that for the first time in hours, maybe even days, she was safe. The man, too, felt a strange sense of connection, a realization that helping someone in need was not only the right thing to do, but also a reminder of what it meant to be human. Hours passed, and the storm outside raged on, but inside, the cabin remained a sanctuary. The woman rested near the fire, wrapped in the blanket, while the man moved quietly, preparing a simple meal to restore her strength. He did not press her for more than she wanted to say, understanding that trust could not be rushed. She ate slowly, savoring the warmth of the food and the comfort of having someone who cared. Each bite restored a bit of energy. Each sip of water renewed her hope. As the night deepened, the woman finally allowed herself to relax completely, laying back on a small cot near the hearth. She watched the fire, mesmerized by its flickering light, feeling a sense of safety she had not known in a long time. The man sat nearby, keeping watch, knowing that while danger still existed in the world outside, within these walls, there was a brief respite from fear. The night stretched on, and a quiet bond began to form between them, built on trust, compassion, and the unspoken understanding that both had faced challenges alone and found each other at the right moment. Outside, the snowstorm continued, but inside, the warmth of the fire, the shelter of the cabin, and the fragile connection between two strangers created a small pocket of hope in a cold, unforgiving world. The snowstorm continued to rage outside, but inside the small cabin, warmth and quiet began to settle. The Apache woman, still wrapped tightly in the thick blanket, felt her body slowly regain some strength. Her shivering had lessened, though the memory of the bitter cold outside still lingered in every ache of her muscles and bones. She glanced at the cowboy as he moved around the cabin, tending to the fire and preparing a simple meal. There was a calm confidence in the way he worked, a quiet assurance that only someone used to living in the wilderness could have. She had never seen anyone like him before. His face was weathered, marked by sun, wind, and hard work, but there was a steadiness in his eyes that reassured her. He seemed aware of her presence without needing to speak, and that awareness carried a sense of respect. Why? She felt a strange mix of relief and caution. not sure if she could fully trust him yet, but grateful for the warmth and safety that surrounded her. When he placed a small plate of food near her, she looked up and nodded, murmuring a quiet, "Thank you." Her voice was still soft, tinged with exhaustion, but it carried genuine gratitude. The cowboy didn't respond with words, only a brief nod before returning to stoking the fire. His silence was not coldness, but careful observation. He wanted to ensure that she was truly in need and not a threat, though the desperation in her eyes made the answer clear. Breath. Slowly, she picked at the food, her hands still trembling slightly. The simple meal, a small portion of stew, bread, and warm water, tasted like luxury after days of hunger and cold. With each bite, she felt a little more human again, a little more herself. The cowboy watched her eat, noting her cautious movements and the way she kept her eyes on him. He did not speak, allowing her space, knowing that trust could not be forced. Breaths. Finally, after a few moments of silence, the woman spoke. I didn't know where else to go," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "The snow. It came so fast, and I was alone. I didn't know if I would survive." Her words trembled, and she hugged her knees to her chest, looking down at the fire. The cowboy paused, his hand resting on the fire poker, and his gaze softened. He could see the truth in her fear, the raw vulnerability of someone who had faced the wilderness alone. "You made it," he said quietly, his voice low but steady. "You're here now. That's what matters." His words were simple, but carried a weight of reassurance. The woman looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time without fear. She saw sincerity there, a reflection of her own desperate hope. For a moment, they simply regarded each other in silence, two strangers bound by circumstance, finding a fragile connection in a harsh world. The woman began to tell her story, haltingly at first, pausing whenever memories of the cold or the dangers she had faced overwhelmed her. She spoke of the journey that had brought her here, of being forced to leave the place she had stayed for safety, and of wandering through the wilderness with nothing but hope. She described the nights when she thought she might not survive, when the wind howled and the snow covered her path, and when exhaustion threatened to overtake her. Each detail revealed courage and resilience, even in moments of fear. The cowboy listened, rarely interrupting. He nodded occasionally, offering small gestures of understanding, letting her feel heard and acknowledged. He had lived alone for many years, relying only on his own skills to survive. Hearing her story reminded him of his own experiences, of nights when danger had seemed insurmountable, and of the rare moments when someone had shown him kindness. He felt a quiet respect growing for the woman before him. As she spoke, he began to share small pieces of his own life, not as a response, but as a way to build trust. He spoke of living on the land, of the harsh winters, of the challenges of survival, and of the value of compassion even in a world that often rewarded solitude and suspicion. He spoke carefully, never imposing, allowing her to choose how much she wanted to hear. Slowly, a sense of understanding grew between them, a connection built not on words alone, but on shared experience and empathy. The storm outside showed no sign of easing. The wind rattled the windows and the snow piled higher, blanketing the world in white. The woman's initial fear of being trapped with a stranger began to fade, replaced by a cautious sense of safety. She realized that the man had offered her shelter not out of obligation but out of genuine concern. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe fully, letting the warmth seep into her bones and the sense of security fill the emptiness she had carried. They worked together to make the cabin feel even more welcoming. She helped him stack more wood near the fire, her small hands nimble despite their numbness. He taught her how to place the logs for optimal warmth, and she followed his instructions carefully, impressed by the simplicity and effectiveness of his methods. In these small moments of cooperation, The boundaries between them softened. Trust was being built not just through words, but through action and shared effort. After a while, the woman's curiosity overcame her caution. She looked around the cabin, noticing the small details, the books on the shelves, the tools neatly arranged, the careful organization that spoke of a life lived with intention and skill. She asked questions quietly, and he answered, his explanations brief but clear. She listened intently, not only absorbing the information but appreciating the patience and calm he showed in guiding her. As the evening progressed, they began to speak more freely. She told him about her family, about the traditions she carried with her, and about the pride and struggles of her people. He listened with genuine interest, learning about a culture he had known little about, and he shared stories of his own upbringing and the lessons he had learned from living on the land. Their conversation was a bridge between two worlds, two lives shaped by very different circumstances, yet connected by shared humanity. The night grew darker, but the storm's fury seemed less frightening inside the cabin. The warmth of the fire, the smell of the stew, and the sound of their voices created a safe cocoon. The woman began to relax fully for the first time since she had left the wilderness. Her shivering stopped, replaced by a steady warmth, and she felt a quiet sense of gratitude that went beyond simple relief. This man, a stranger hours before, had become a lifeline, offering not only warmth but understanding and kindness. Eventually, they fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire. The woman leaned back against the blanket, feeling the tension of the day melting away. The cowboy watched her quietly, noticing the small details. The way her shoulders had relaxed, the faint glow of relief in her eyes, and the steady rhythm of her breathing. He realized that helping someone in need was not just about survival. It was about restoring a sense of dignity and hope that had been lost in the cold and isolation. Hours passed, and the snowstorm outside continued its relentless dance. Yet inside, a fragile bond had formed, rooted in trust, compassion, and shared humanity. The woman finally allowed herself to rest completely, knowing that for at least this night she was safe. The cowboy, though still watchful, felt a quiet satisfaction in providing that safety. The night stretched on, long and cold outside, but within the cabin, warmth and understanding had begun to blossom. As the fire burned low, the woman whispered softly, almost to herself, "Thank you for everything." The cowboy simply nodded, acknowledging her words without needing to speak. Their connection had grown in silence and small gestures, in shared effort and empathy, and it was a bond that neither could easily forget. The snowstorm raged on, but for the first time in days the Apache woman felt hope. She knew the world outside was harsh and unforgiving, but inside this small cabin she had found safety, trust, and a glimpse of something brighter. And the cowboy, once a solitary figure, found a quiet reminder of the power of compassion, of the human capacity to reach out and protect someone in need. Outside the world was still cold and wild, but inside a fragile warmth persisted, a warmth that promised that even in the harshest conditions, trust, kindness, and understanding could survive, and sometimes that was enough to change everything. The night stretched on, and although the warmth of the fire kept the cabin cozy, the wind outside had grown stronger. The snowstorm had not eased at all. It seemed as if the world outside was determined to keep them trapped inside. The Apache woman sat near the hearth, wrapped in a thick blanket, her hands slowly regaining feeling as she warmed herself. Her eyes occasionally flicked to the windows, watching the snow swirl in wild patterns, feeling a mixture of relief for being safe and unease for the world outside. The cowboy, still alert, moved around the cabin with a quiet energy, checking the door, ensuring that the woodpile was secure and the fire burning steadily. He had lived through countless storms, and he knew that even a familiar place could become dangerous in extreme conditions. But now, with the woman here, his concern went beyond mere survival. He understood that he was not just protecting himself anymore. Her safety rested in his hands as well. That realization brought a weight he had not expected, but he carried it with the calm determination of someone used to responsibility. Suddenly, a sound from outside made them both freeze. It was faint at first, almost drowned out by the wind, but it was distinct. A rustle in the snow, the snap of a branch under weight. The cowboy immediately moved to the window, peering through the icy glass. At first, he saw nothing but a white blur, the snow so thick that the world beyond seemed to disappear. But then, a shadow moved in the distance. He squinted, trying to identify it, his instincts telling him to prepare for whatever danger might be approaching. The Apache woman noticed his sudden alertness and tensed, but she had learned from her people to recognize danger quickly, to trust instincts in the wild. She whispered, her voice almost trembling, Is it dangerous?" The cowboy shook his head slightly, not wanting to alarm her, but he could not hide the tension in his posture. "Could be," he said quietly. "Stay close and don't move unless I tell you." They both moved toward the center of the cabin, where the fire offered warmth but not enough protection from anything that might come through the door. The cowboy grabbed a sturdy wooden staff he kept nearby for emergencies, a tool both for work and for protection. The woman stood close, her breathing steadying as she drew upon her own knowledge of survival. Despite her earlier exhaustion, the threat outside awakened her senses, sharpening her attention to every sound and movement. The shadow outside grew clearer for a moment as a gust of wind blew, revealing the shape of a large wolf, its eyes reflecting the firelight from inside the cabin. The cowboy stiffened. Wolves were dangerous, especially when desperate or hungry, and this one seemed determined, its movements deliberate as it circled near the cabin. He had faced wild animals before, but now he had to protect not only himself but also the woman who had sought his help. He whispered, "Stay behind me, watch my movements, and don't panic." The wolf lunged toward the cabin, its paws striking the snow with force. The woman gasped and instinctively stepped back, clinging to the cowboy's sleeve. He swung the staff toward the door, banging it hard against the frame. The sound startled the wolf, causing it to hesitate, but it did not retreat. The tension in the cabin was thick. Both hearts raced, and the fire's warmth could not chase away the fear that gripped them. The cowboy realized that they needed a plan, ration. Simply waiting would not protect them. He moved closer to the door, his hands steady, speaking quietly to the woman. "I'm going to make some noise outside. You stay here, and if anything happens, move behind me and hold the blanket around yourself." She nodded, trusting him completely, her fear tempered by the bond that had grown over the past hours. For the first time, she realized that he would truly protect her, no matter the danger. He stepped outside into the snow, the storm hitting him like a wall. Snow whipped around his face, but he stood firm, swinging the staff in deliberate motions, shouting to scare the wolf away. The wolf growled and circled, but the cowboy's confidence and determination were clear. The animal eventually retreated, disappearing into the storm, leaving the cabin quiet except for the sound of the wind and the crackle of the fire. The cowboy re-entered, brushing snow from his coat, and the woman exhaled deeply, relief flooding her features. Once inside, they both realized how close the danger had come. The woman's hand shook slightly, but it was no longer from cold. It was adrenaline, fear, and a surge of respect for the man who had risked himself to save her.
"Oh, you saved me," she said softly, looking up at him with wide, grateful eyes.
The cowboy nodded, not needing to speak, letting the action speak for him. The trust between them had grown deeper in that moment, solidified by the shared encounter with danger. Hours passed, and the storm continued, though the immediate threat of the wolf had passed. They settled near the fire, sharing quiet conversation. The woman spoke of her people, her history, and the hardships she had faced in life. She shared stories of resilience and survival, and the cowboy listened, genuinely interested, learning about the world she had come from. In return, he told her more about his own experiences, not just the practicalities of living in the wilderness, but the lessons he had learned about perseverance, courage, and the importance of compassion. The conversation created a bond that went beyond survival, narration. It was a connection born of shared struggle, of recognizing strength and vulnerability in each other, and of understanding that even in the harshest conditions, people could find trust and kindness. The woman realized that she was no longer just a desperate stranger. She was someone who mattered, someone whose presence inspired caution, care, and protection in another human being. As night deepened, the cabin grew quiet. The woman wrapped herself in the blanket again, feeling safer than she had in days. She realized how much she had relied on the cowboy's presence, his calm authority, and his unwavering attention to danger. Desperation. She also realized that she was learning to trust again, slowly opening her heart to the idea that kindness could exist even in a world that had often seemed cruel. The cowboy watched her from across the room, quietly reflecting on what had happened. He had faced countless storms, dangers, and lonely nights. But this night had been different. Protecting someone else, seeing their fear and relief, and knowing he had made a difference. It was a powerful feeling, one that reminded him why he continued to live the way he did. Survival alone was not enough. True survival meant helping others when they needed it most. Outside, the wind continued to blow, but inside the cabin, warmth, trust, and understanding had taken root. The woman's strength returned slowly, not just physically but emotionally, as she realized that she had found someone she could rely on. The cowboy's respect for her had grown as well, recognizing her resilience, intelligence, and courage. Together they had faced danger, and together they had survived. By the time the first light of dawn began to filter through the snow-covered windows, the storm had weakened slightly. The snow still fell, but the world outside seemed less threatening than before. They had endured the night together, and in doing so, their bond had become something solid, something unspoken yet undeniable. The woman now trusted that she would not be left alone. And the cowboy knew that he had found not only someone to protect, but also someone whose presence had changed the rhythm of his solitary life. The day ahead was uncertain, and the world outside was still harsh, but they faced it together now. The trust and courage that had been tested during the night had grown into a quiet strength, one that would guide them in the challenges to come. The storm had forced them to rely on each other fully, revealing their resilience, bravery, and humanity in a way that words alone could not capture. As they prepared for the day, gathering firewood and checking the cabin, both realized that the night's events had transformed their relationship. They were no longer simply a cowboy and a stranger. They were allies, connected by the shared experience of survival, trust, and the courage to face danger together. Each glance, each gesture carried meaning, and each small act of care strengthened the bond they had built. The night had been a crucible, testing their trust, bravery, and empathy. They had faced danger together, survived, and emerged stronger, not just as individuals, but as companions in a harsh world. Breathed. And though the storm had not yet fully passed, they knew that together they could face whatever came next with courage, trust, and the quiet assurance that comes from knowing someone has your back, no matter what. Morning came slowly, the first pale light of dawn seeping through the frost-covered windows. The storm outside had lessened, the snow still falling gently, but no longer violent and relentless. The world beyond the cabin was white and quiet, almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos of the night before. Inside, warmth from the fire filled the small space, giving the Apache woman a sense of calm she had not felt in days. She stretched slowly, her body still stiff from the cold and tension of the past hours, but now free from fear. The cowboy moved quietly around the cabin, tending to the fire and checking supplies. But he had barely slept, his mind alert to any danger. But the peaceful morning gave him a small sense of relief. He glanced at the woman, noticing how she had shifted in her rest, how the color had returned to her cheeks, and how her breathing had become steady. The sight brought a quiet smile to his face. She was alive, safe, and stronger than she had seemed the night before. They moved with a quiet rhythm, a shared understanding born of survival and trust. The woman helped him stack firewood, her hands no longer trembling but steady and capable. They prepared a simple breakfast together, the act of working side by side feeling natural and comforting. There was no need for excessive conversation. Each action, each glance carried meaning. She offered a small smile, which he returned, the gesture carrying more warmth than words could express. After breakfast, they sat near the fire watching the snow outside and listening to the soft patter of the storm's remnants. The woman spoke first, her voice steady now, carrying confidence born from the ordeal of the past night. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she said, her eyes meeting his. I thought I wouldn't make it through the storm." Her words were sincere, and the cowboy nodded, feeling the weight of her gratitude. "You made it," he replied simply. "That's what matters. You fought through it, and you survived. You're strong." There was no arrogance in his words, only recognition. The woman felt a deep respect for him in that moment, realizing that strength came in many forms, physical, emotional, and in the courage to protect others.
A conversation turns to the future!
The woman explained that she had no immediate place to go, no family nearby, and no safe refuge in the harsh winter landscape. She had been alone for so long, and the thought of continuing her journey filled her with both fear and determination. The cowboy listened carefully, considering the situation. He had offered her shelter for the night, but now he realized that helping her might mean more than temporary refuge. Breath. After a pause, he spoke thoughtfully. "You don't have to leave immediately." Narration. "The snow is still deep. The paths are dangerous, and it's not safe to travel yet. You can stay here until it's safe." The woman's eyes filled with relief and gratitude. She had expected kindness, perhaps, but not this generosity. The offer was simple, practical, and life-saving. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Breaths, "Thank you, more than I can say." As the hours passed, the storm faded completely and the sun began to warm the snow-covered land outside. The cabin felt alive, the fire casting long shadows on the walls, the smell of dry wood and simple food filling the air. The woman and the cowboy moved through the day with quiet cooperation, mending small items, preparing supplies, and simply existing together in a space that had become safe and welcoming. Each task reinforced their bond, each shared moment building trust and understanding. The cowboy began to share practical knowledge with her, teaching her skills that would help her survive beyond the cabin, how to prepare wood efficiently, how to read the weather through signs in the environment, how to conserve energy and stay warm in harsh conditions. The woman listened intently, absorbing the lessons with a mix of curiosity and determination. She asked questions, tried techniques, and learned quickly. The man's patience and willingness to guide her deepened the trust between them, showing her that compassion and teaching could coexist with survival. As the sun climbed higher, the woman ventured to the edge of the cabin, looking out at the pristine snow-covered fields and trees. The world seemed endless, but no longer threatening, frail but real, growing within her. She realized that she could face the challenges ahead, not alone, but with the knowledge and skills she had gained and the experience of being trusted and protected. The cowboy watched her from the doorway, a quiet sense of satisfaction in his chest. He had faced many difficult situations in life, but helping someone who had endured so much, who had shown courage despite fear, reminded him of the importance of human connection. Breaths. Strength was not just in survival, it was in empathy, in extending help when it mattered most. He felt a bond with her that went beyond circumstance. It was a quiet, unspoken understanding of shared resilience and respect. As the day progressed, they began to prepare for the woman's eventual journey beyond the cabin. She would need to continue her path eventually, but now she was no longer weak, exhausted, and desperate. Breath, she had strength, knowledge, and a newfound confidence, as well as the reassurance that someone had cared for her when the world seemed indifferent. They packed supplies together, the man giving her items that could sustain her on her journey, showing attention to detail and concern for her safety. Before she left, they stood outside together looking at the horizon, the snow sparkling in the sunlight. The woman's eyes were bright, reflecting gratitude, relief, and a sense of possibility. She turned to the cowboy and spoke softly.
I will never forget what you did for me.
You gave me more than warmth. You gave me hope. The cowboy nodded, his expression calm but carrying a depth of emotion he rarely expressed. You were brave, he said simply. Remember that. You survived because of your courage, and that courage will carry you forward.
They shook hands, a gesture simple in appearance, but rich in meaning.
It was a connection that had formed in the crucible of danger, strengthened by trust and shared humanity. As the woman began her journey, stepping carefully through the snow with the supplies and knowledge she had gained, she felt a confidence that had been missing before. She had faced the storm, survived danger, and found trust in a stranger. A man whose compassion had changed her path forever. The cowboy watched her disappear into the snowy landscape, feeling a quiet fulfillment. He had helped her survive, yes, but he had also been reminded of the importance of kindness, courage, and empathy. The world could be harsh and unforgiving, but small acts of care and protection could make a profound difference. He returned to the cabin, tending the fire and preparing for the day, carrying the knowledge that he had made a difference, and that trust and compassion were never wasted. By the time the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the snow with warm shades of gold, the woman had reached a safer path, her spirit strengthened and her journey renewed. She knew challenges lay ahead, but the lessons she had learned and the bond she had formed would guide her. And the cowboy, standing by the doorway of the cabin, looked at the fading light with a sense of quiet pride. The night of danger, the storm, and the shared struggle had passed, leaving something lasting: hope, trust, and the knowledge that even in the coldest, harshest conditions, humanity could shine brightly. In the end, the storm had not just tested them, it had changed them. The woman was stronger, wiser, and full of hope. The cowboy had been reminded of the power of empathy and the strength found in helping others. Both had faced fear and uncertainty. Both had relied on courage, and both had discovered a connection that, though formed in extraordinary circumstances, would remain in memory long after the snow had melted. The world outside was vast and still dangerous, but inside the cabin, the warmth, the lessons, and the bond they had built would endure. And as the Apache woman disappeared into the distance, moving towards safety and possibility, the cowboy returned to his life, quietly carrying the knowledge that he had made a difference, that he had saved a life, and that sometimes even the smallest acts of courage and kindness could change everything.